Okay, everyone, for those that are left, we just want to, now that everyone's had a quick think about Crux, your feedback, any questions is valuable. So we just want to give a quick opportunity just to do a little bit of Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, core team is here. So any questions before we all go and sort of go for drinks and continue the night? Let's do 2 or 3 questions just to sort of wrap up. But anyone have a question that we can jump into?
So forgive my ignorance about how all this stuff works, but is it possible to do a streaming query? So as new things arrive in the transaction, new results arrive through your data log query. Is that a thing?
Okay, so everyone had a question. So yeah, everyone had. So my answer to that is that this idea of like streaming data log, if people have seen things like 3DF or reactive or declarative data flow, yeah, it is possible to build queries using data log that stream results. You subscribe to it. So Crux doesn't do that, and the indexes it uses aren't optimized for that. Obviously, you can do something naive in terms of listening for transactions which contain references to entities that you're interested in, then rerun the query. And what we've actually done is a small spike with 3DF and declarative data flow, and plugged it. No, it was 3DF, wasn't it? And put them side by side, and we think those two things together get you that. But Crux natively doesn't do the streaming of the query, so it's more like a normal database. Good question. Oh, did you want to mention it? No, that's fine. Susan, hi.
So this is from Andy Chambers, who's raised his hand. He asks, is there a Kafka Connect connector for Crux?
So the answer is not yet, but we are talking to Confluent, and we're excited to build on that relationship. John and Malcolm know people from, and Håkan, you all know people that work at Confluent. So yeah, we think that's a very strong possibility for the near future. I know. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll go to the ones that were raised earlier. Also, I just had a good chat about this age-old, why stop at 2 dimensions? Which is a great question because it's really hard to answer. So what do we think? I don't know, John, if you wanted to come back or something. We could talk about event sourcing, or is the transaction log stable? Would you like to? How about that? Is the transaction log stable? Can we rely on it?
I would say you can rely on transaction log, assuming you rely on Kafka, basically. That would be my answer to that question. So as Jeremy mentioned earlier, the transaction log is a single partition Kafka topic, but almost all of the data in Crux sits in the document topic, which can be partitioned. So yes, I would say the general idea it should be stable, yes.
Yeah, specifically the format, I think it was maybe the question.
Yeah, okay. So, well, if we change the format, we will not break the previous format, right? Like we will only add to the current format, because by definition, with this transaction log of your database, only under extreme circumstances would we do a breaking change there, which I would say never, right? We are currently doing some breaking changes before we go into beta, and so, but yeah, this should not happen, basically. You can trust on that.
Good.
I was going to offer a more weaselly answer to that, which if we were to ever break the format, the fact that you can decant or replay an entire system into another, and you can preserve the valid times, meant that we still preserve that get out of jail free card. But essentially what we're talking about is that you can write, you're just writing Eden maps to Kafka. Now, there might be some sort of additional things, we might relax a few constraints on what you can put as attribute IDs and entity IDs and things, but essentially it's going to be a backwardly compatible change.
Yep. Can I answer the one about the why stop at 2 dimensions? Yeah. So the 2 dimensions is like, they are the most fundamental dimensions. They're like, if you think about dimensions. Like, do you really care about a 13th dimension? Because 3D is, anyway. The primary dimensions are what's important. So the most important thing is the first two. So you have transaction time, and then bitemporality gives you that valid time that you can then insert into the past. So that's like a huge upgrade on just the transaction time. But then once you have those two, you can, if you need to have a domain time, so you want to have a different time axis, then you can sort of carve your data up in a way, so you can split your data up into different chunks, so then you can reuse a valid time to model that as domain time. So the proof will be in the pudding, but basically the 2 dimensions gives you that ability to model the nth more dimensions that you might need.
Yeah, there are a few papers about this, and this question's been asked in the kind of bitemporal domain before. Actually, are you going to?
I was going to say a bit of that. Yeah, so it was the Jensen thesis, Christian Jensen, big famous bitemporal guy. He sort of had that written in his thesis. But also I wanted to say is what John said is correct. You do want to sort of break down, decompose the domain time into valid time. But depending on what you then want to do with that domain time, you may need to have like an additional index. Or I was just saying, maybe just spin up another Crux node and use its valid time to model your domain time from the master node. There are ways to work around it, but certainly for the problems that we're interested in solving, the 2 dimensions seem to be more than enough. But yeah, if you want to get crazy, there's some really wild things you might want to do with bitemporality, which Crux doesn't support today. But this point in time query stuff, being able to specify valid time and transaction time, is more than enough for mere mortals like us, I think. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll talk about event sourcing briefly. Okay, would you like to give the event sourcing answer?
Do I want to? Yeah. Well, so my answer about event sourcing may not be the official one, right? But the way I see it is the transaction log is a kind of event, but it won't be your events. So whatever Crux does not automatically map to your event sourcing solution. You could use Crux to build an event sourcing solution. So it's kind of the same answer as Jeremy gave before. But Crux itself does not necessarily automatically give you an event sourcing system, right? The transactions, yes, they are events that happens, but they are Crux domain level events. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this in the break. I think a lot of event sourcing systems are built because of the problem with time being fundamental. And they're stuck at that level of abstraction, and they can't kind of raise themselves up to talking about documents again, because they get down at having to think about and modeling time as a first class concept in the system itself. Crux relinquishes you from that constraint so that you can think about update in place, document puts, and you're still getting the benefits. You're kind of solving the problem in a different way.
Yeah, and actually, if you Google bitemporal event sourcing, you'll see people talking about, actually, I have my event source system, but I want to insert into things in the middle of the event log. So people already think about proactive and retroactive events. But actually, I'd almost argue event sourcing is like a reinvention of this concept, which Eric Domain, he's like a famous origami man. Anyway, he works at MIT, and he did a big thesis in like 2004 or something, talking about retroactive data structures, and arguably all this bitemporal stuff is just a retroactive data structure. And the idea of an event source is that the future, the end state is dependent on all those previous inputs, and in order to actually change those inputs in valid time, there's no generalized way. It's like proving there's no generalized way of like abstracting that. So event sourcing is basically that model. And then there's implications around recomputing old queries. So you have this idea of non-oblivious retroactive data structures where you store the query at the time you did it, and then when you make updates to valid time, you can find the queries that need to be sort of recalculated on the basis of information that's now changed. And to do that kind of stuff is all essential for event sourcing, but we're still sort of in the early days of figuring out how to apply Crux to that use case. But certainly, I think it seems to be a common goal. Okay. Anything else? This is John McCarthy, in case anyone wasn't obvious or felt too ashamed to ask. So we had a friend of John's do the design. Hope you like it. Make sure you pick them up. There's still t-shirts. Still plenty of t-shirts. And we've got the older Jux designs as well. And if you want more, come to XT20 next year. All right, anything else, Susan? Thank you.
Just quickly to thank everyone for coming. I'm going to be spending the rest of my anniversary going through the exercises and examples that you showed us, and just a big round to thank our amazing speakers tonight. Thank you very much, guys.